Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, we go back 50 years to a murder that is one of Canada's most notorious. A model and mother is bludgeoned to death in her garage, and her husband is accused in a plot to kill her.
When you get a call at night, you know it's something serious. And when it's the boss, you really know it. And so I got my car, I headed down there.
Okay, it was a two-bay garage, and the one on the right was partially open.
It wasn't the body that I saw at the start. It was red blood flowing down the driveway.
When we walked in, I couldn't believe it. I mean, there was so much trauma to her head.
They don't find any signs of breaking and entering. They don't find signs of sexual assault, and nothing has been taken from the house.
He didn't quite react the part. Now that could be due to shock, of course, but it wasn't consistent with a grieving husband, I can tell you that.
They had insurance policies of $1 million on each other. If Christine died, theoretically Peter would have got the money, and that became very much a part of the case.
It had not been a happy marriage for a long time, but that doesn't lead one inextricably to murder.
I think the first big break for the police came when they got a call from a woman. She was the girlfriend of Peter's best friend, Chaba.
Chaba is trying to get Peter to admit to the murder.
The police are listening and watching. They are absolutely mystified. This to them is evidence of guilt.
A month after Christine's murder, Peter is arrested by Mississauga police for non-capital murder.
The trial becomes one of the longest in Canadian history, with a cast of characters too bizarre for even a B movie.
The police receive a call from another Hungarian who offers the idea that he knows who the murderer is. It's this guy named the Duck.
I have never, ever seen a trial in Canada where anybody showed up with a bag on their head.
It seemed that with each subsequent detail that came out, it got crazier and crazier.
Here now is part 2 of the death of Christine Demeter by persons unknown. A trial unlike any other is heating up London, Ontario's Superior Court, where successful builder Peter Demeter is charged with his wife's murder.
I couldn't believe what I walked into. I kind of likened it to being an extra in a movie. The plot was incredible. It had money, sex, murder, police shootouts, trips to Hungary, everything you could think of. And I've never seen any trial anywhere in the world anything like it.
The Christine Demeter murder is lurid detail piled on lurid details. You don't need to sensationalize to write a sensational story about this case. The prosecution's star witness is Peter's best friend, drinking buddy, former house guest, Chaba, who has been wearing a wire for police.
There's no guarantee the jury will hear these tapes. The judge is deciding whether they're admissible.
When that case started, right, Crown basically had nothing. Didn't have a suspect who actually wielded the weapon, who actually attacked her. They had no physical evidence whatsoever, no fingerprints.
The court is set to hear from more than 100 witnesses.
A lot of the prosecution witnesses paint a very damning portrait of Peter as a controlling, domineering husband. One of Peter's favorite gags was that he would say that when he dies, he would leave everything to the dog Beelzebub except for the color television, which he would leave to Christine because she enjoyed it more than the dog.
One surprise witness changes the course of the trial.
I have never, ever seen a trial in Canada where anybody showed up with a bag on their head. I mean, it was absolutely remarkable.
Mr. X enters the courtroom wearing a hood with the eyes and mouth cut out, and he's there to support the prosecution's assertion that the duck is the hitman who was hired by Peter to murder Christine.
The duck was a small-time crook. I think he had a criminal record, but nothing terribly serious. He was part of a shady group of rounders, as we called them then. They were small-time criminals. They pickpocketed, they may have been second-story people who robbed houses.
Detectives hunt for the duck in Toronto's watering holes.
That was his nickname, obviously, and he was known as Imre Olejniczuk. He was a worker of Hungarian extract who lived in Toronto.
A tip leads him to the home of Maria Wisniewski.
Marie Wisniewski was a lovely lady, a lovely daughter. She was talking about blueprints that had been delivered to Imre and her at her house, and that she believed that they had been part and parcel of Peter Demeter's history that we were investigating. It nearly knocked me over with a feather when she said, "I've still got the plans, they're under the bed, would you like to have a look at them?" Well, yes, we would.
She also hands them a business card of a man that had come looking for her husband. Detectives discover the blueprints are from a housing unit being constructed by Eden Gardens, Peter Demeter's company.
The investigation led to the possibility that the duck was to be involved in killing Christine Demeter, and the method was to be by going to 52 Dawes Road.
2 hours west of Toronto, the prosecution calls the contractor on the business card, a man with an unusual past, to the stand.
I remember Frank Stark got up on the stand. I looked at the other guys and went, I can't believe this, John. This guy's a foreign legionnaire, a French foreign legionnaire. Where do we get these people, you know?
Frank, or Frank Stark, is an employee of Peter's, and Stark has two very interesting stories to tell. The first is that Peter asks Stark to find him someone who can help him get rid of his wife.
Ferenc Stark didn't want to kill Christine, so he called up another Hungarian who said he was perfectly willing. He was a small-time enforcer who broke people's arms and legs.
The plot that they concoct is to lure Christine to one of Peter's houses on Dawes Avenue in Toronto, and Christine is going to hand the duck a set of blueprints.
And the duck was supposed to be involved in either knocking her or throwing her down the stairs, and to make it look like it had been accidental.
An accident, so that Peter can reap the rewards of a hefty insurance policy. Joseph Robert Jones, also known as Foxy Jones, testifies that he drove the duck to 52 Dawes Road.
This plot actually happens. Peter hands Christine a set of blueprints. Christine drives to the house on Dawes Avenue.
Hidden inside the rolled papers, thousands of dollars. Payment for her murder.
She goes inside and she meets the duck and hands him the blueprints. The duck's plan is to simply take Peter's money and not kill Christine, and this sort of results in the botched plot.
He wasn't going to kill Christine. He'd just take the money and get the hell out of Canada.
Weeks later, Christine is murdered. The plot is the first evidence of Peter approaching anyone to kill his wife.
I think that was our first indication that there was plans and that the plans had arrived.
Stark's testimony changes the course of the trial. The judge revokes Peter's bail.
He was taken from the courtroom and walked across the street in London, Ontario, to one of the oldest prisons in Canada. It was a terrible prison. The cell in which Peter was suddenly finding himself was no longer the length of his height, and if you stretched your arm out, you could touch the other wall. I went to see it, and I couldn't imagine how he could have stood it after a life of some opulence.
Press coverage of Peter being led to his new cell causes an upheaval, resulting in the jury being sequestered.
The sequestration of the jury was not done until over halfway through the trial, and the jury would have gone home every night to screaming headlines and pictures that more or less said Peter was guilty.
Ferenc Stark's first testimony helps the prosecution. His second will benefit the defense.
Stark tells the jury that it's Christine who first hires him to kill Peter. It seemed that with each subsequent detail that came out, it got crazier and crazier.
Welcome back. Even though the trial of Peter Demeter, accused in the plot to murder his wife Christine, is fully underway, investigators are still gathering evidence. We return now to the death of Christine Demeter by persons unknown. In Hungary, police have tracked down the Duck and begin an extradition process to bring him back to Canada.
The investigation was full blast during the trial. Evidence was pouring in, all kinds of wild evidence. Like this was a wild trial. These gentlemen, my friends, were there with their foot to the floor of the accelerator, no fear, and away we go.
Well, I think it was one of the most intriguing cases because it has so many twists and turns along the way. This case produced evidence on a daily basis.
While searching Ferenc Stark's home, detectives discover something that makes the Crown nervous.
The fact that Ferenc Stark had a subpoena from the defense attorneys in his pocket. And that was a surprise to everyone because why the defense were subpoenaing this gentleman, we've no idea.
Stark had a second story to tell the jury, and this one ended up helping the defense by painting Christine as a little bit less than the innocent victim. Christine came to him with a proposition to hire him for two things: to furnish her with a .22 caliber rifle, and two, offering the man who's going to use that rifle to kill Peter an airtight alibi. That man is Chaba, the prosecution's star witness.
The defense reminds jurors that Christine, too, could benefit from an insurance payout.
One of the motives that emerged early was that Peter Demeter had $1 million insurance policy on Christine Demeter and vice versa. That was a lot of money back in those days.
John Scott, who's a criminal prosecutor working alongside the Crown attorneys in the same office, doesn't buy it.
I never understood how that would fly or sell, and it didn't. I never thought that that would fit the criminal activity that we have. It just never made sense to me.
Did Christine ever really plot to have Peter murdered? And I'm just not sure. She certainly was afraid for her own life, but I don't think she was the kind of woman who would plan in response to kill first.
The courtroom comes to a hush as the defense points its finger at a more heinous suspect.
For the defense's part, they sought to offer alternative suspects for the murder of Christine. One of the biggest suspects was a man named Henry Robert Williams, who was a serial rapist and murderer who was preying on young women in Mississauga.
So now we'll just try and find all kinds of other suspects. Henry Williams is as good as any because he's already done the 2 murders out there, but maybe one juror says, yeah, it could be Henry Williams.
Henry Williams is charged with the rape and murder of 19-year-old Constance Dickey and Netta Novak, and the rape and attempted murder of a 16-year-old.
While on the stand, Williams admitted to the murders of Constance Dickey and Netta Novak, but he vehemently denied being the murderer of Christine Demeter.
You know, here's a guy who owns up to 2 plus an attempt and is asked about another one, said, no, I didn't, that's not my play, I didn't do that one.
When he confessed to the murder of the other 2 girls, that gave him the ring of authenticity. Why would he confess if he hadn't done it? And when he said he hadn't done Christine, they believed him because he had confessed to the other girls, which got rid of any theory of Peter's that the Dracula of Streetsville had been the murderer of Christine.
It's a thoroughly different crime scene. It's a different type of homicide. There's no sexual connotation to Christine's particular murder.
In the garage, nothing leads them back to Williams.
I think I was on the stand for 3 days. There was evidence of some hair that was on her hand, and again, it potentially could have been hair from the perpetrator, so that was also bagged and sent to the Center of Forensic Sciences. It didn't result in anything. It was her hair, but obviously it came off, or I would think it came off when she was protecting her head with her hand. Yes, there was nothing discovered that was of any significance as far as identifying the perpetrator.
And after an extensive search, no weapon is found. Pathologists take to the stand and describe repeated blows to her skull with powerful force.
What always puzzled me was the violence of it. Why was it necessary to hit her 7 times? That seemed to me to have some personal animus in it.
In a jail cell in Guelph, investigators hear a story about that weapon and who allegedly wielded it. "50 years ago, James Bailey wrote an article to track the cast of characters in this trial.
I've never seen anything like it. Austrian models, Hungarian assassins. It was kind of hard to keep track, so I thought a reader might find that helpful. Imre Olenek, 40, also known as the Duck, would cheat his own mother out of her pension check. Charged with the murder of Christine Demeter, Czabazalagi, 35. He has testified Demeter approached him with at least 10 plots against Christine Demeter's life. Ferenc Stark, 50, says he hired Kaksa for Peter Demeter and that Christine Demeter offered him $3,000 for a .22 caliber rifle and an alibi for Czabazalagi. Marina Hunt, 29, a well-known Viennese fashion model, described by the prosecution as a motive for Christine Demeter's murder.
The media is following the motive out and about the courthouse. Detective Barry King is assigned as her chaperone.
The funniest part was where we found the media when we come out of the hotel in the morning. They were on top of telephone poles, they were on top of roofs, they were all over the place.
When I saw the photos of Marina, I thought if I were Peter's lawyer, I would not have her out walking Peter's dog. I wouldn't have her anywhere near this trial. Even though they scrubbed her face and put her in very respectable clothing, she was still this glamour girl and very obviously a motive for murder.
You felt like you were an extra watching a movie, but it was all real.
Fact is stranger than fiction when the defense calls their biggest witness, a man nicknamed the Tractor.
Joe DiNardo, he was basically a Toronto rounder, a big man, a boxer, had a bit of a reputation for breaking arms and legs for a living.
Investigators meet the Tractor in prison, where he is awaiting sentencing for arson.
He was trying to break into a place one night and set it on fire, including his hands. So he had to drive from Hamilton all the way to St. Joseph's in Toronto with his hands all burnt.
He tells detectives that his friend confessed to barring Christine.
Laszlo Epper is a career criminal who is sent to prison for life for the attempted murder of a police officer.
Nearly 6 years into his sentence at Collins Bay Penitentiary, Epper takes a prison worker hostage and forces him to drive to Ottawa. When the car runs out of gas, he steals another car at gunpoint and drives to Toronto. On July 18, 1973, the night of the murder, DiNardo says there was a knock on his door.
According to him, Laszlo Epper arrived at his Lawrence Avenue apartment with blood-stained clothes and begged DiNardo to help him dispose of those clothes. And as he was doing so, Epper confessed to the killing of Christine Demeter.
DiNardo claims that Epper came to DiNardo's place covered in blood and said that he had gotten into a dispute with her about money, and that he, I think the term used was barred her, which I took to mean bludgeoned her to death.
A month after the murder, a police officer spots a car making an illegal left turn and tries to pull him over.
Laszlo Epper was involved with Metro Toronto Police. It was a car chase, shots were fired, and Laszlo Epper lost his life as a result of that incident.
On Shaw Street, police searched the house Epper had been holed up in. In the basement, they find goods linking him to brazen crimes and discover a surprising link to Peter Demeter.
They found a notation, a piece of paper that had Peter Demeter's name on it, and Bill Taggart's name was on there as well.
Superintendent William Taggart is leading this case for the Mississauga police. The handwritten note is entered as an exhibit at trial, but DiNardo's testimony about Laszlo Epper's confession is not.
It's this alleged confession that the jury didn't hear at all because Judge Campbell Grant ruled it inadmissible hearsay.
DiNardo would have liked to have said that I saw Laszlo Epper at my door one time and he confessed that he killed Christine. Now, that would have been a real knockout.
Detectives pull out the floorboards of Laszlo Epper's car, looking for traces of blood, but don't find anything.
There was a real wild card late in the trial. But the jury are looking at guys who get into shootouts with the police, guys who break arms and legs for a living, guys who agree to take money to throw Christine down the stairs and then abscond with it. You had a real cast of characters here.
Welcome back. As the prosecution is set to call their star witness, the defense tries to stop them from playing damning wiretaps of Peter Demeter. Evidence, the Crown argues, is crucial to their case. We now return to the death of Christine Demeter by persons unknown. In Peter Demeter's criminal trial, the court has heard many theories on who killed his wife.
I don't know who killed Christine. I really don't know. I think the duck had something to do with it. I think it's even possible that Joe DiNardo had something to do with it. The one thing the jury had to concentrate on was, did Peter commission the crime?
The prosecution calls their star witness to the stand.
Csaba was Peter's closest friend. He had known him in Budapest. Both of them had survived very difficult odds in crossing out of Hungary and into Austria. And Peter took him into his house for his first year and a half in Canada, and he lived with the Demeters.
His evidence basically was that Peter Demeter discussed plots to kill Christine over a period of about 5 years. Various schemes, some of which were harebrained schemes. Demeter wants Csaba to do some of these things. He wants him to be the killer. The fact that they had to discuss this longer than one conversation is weird, never mind for 5 years.
What the jury doesn't know is they may get to hear some of these unusual conversations. A day after Christine's murder, Peter's best friend became an informant.
When the police spoke to him initially, he had no difficulty in agreeing to wearing a wire.
The police used every opportunity to have these two intercepted talking together.
Peter occasionally hinted that he knew Christine's killer.
Szabo would try and draw Demeter into discussions about topics on their crazy themes, and had some success doing that, which verified that there were some wild discussions.
It's really confusing to work out what in God's name they are talking about. The one line that everyone wonders about is when Peter says to Chaba by way of advice, "Let's try and always stay with the truth, with the exception of the vital point." The vital point, what is that? The vital point being Peter commissioned the murder or the name of the murderer.
One thing you don't hear on the tapes is any declarations of innocence. The police suspect me, the fools. I mean, why don't they get the right guy here? This is horrible, you know. What don't you hear? Right? Because an innocent man wouldn't be talking like this.
The wiretaps are crucial to the prosecution's case, but the defense is fighting to throw them out.
Somebody decided to erase some of these tapes that they thought were irrelevant, which was a mistake. Could very well cause a reasonable doubt. What's not on the tapes, you know, signs of innocence, denials, doesn't go very far when some of the tapes have been erased.
And there are some conversations that were recorded that should not have been.
Demeter was intercepted talking to his lawyers, which was a big no-no in Canadian law. When a lawyer talks to their client, it's what we call privilege, wiretapping that contravenes the defendant's rights, the suspect's rights, and that was a major, major mistake.
The defense are saying the taping was downright illegal because of a new law now in effect.
The problem for the defense was that at the time of the investigation, it was still legal. And so Judge Campbell Grant ruled that the tapes were admissible because they couldn't retroactively be ruled as illegal.
The admission of the tapes was really a game changer for the trial. Without the tapes, they had nothing. Taped evidence is, of course, very strong. I mean, the guy's saying out of his own mouth what he's up to.
The 6'4" giant, the Tractor, is called to the stand.
So Joseph DiNardo tells the jury about a meeting that he had with Laszlo. And Laszlo Epper at this time is on the run from the law after escaping prison. DiNardo meets with him in the parking lot of Sherway Gardens, and at the meeting is a tall, statuesque blonde wearing sunglasses who offers DiNardo money to murder the woman's husband.
Through a picture, he identifies Christine as that woman and says that Epper was having an affair with her.
According to him, Epper could have had a falling out with his lover, Christine Demeter, that might have resulted in her death.
His story fit very nicely. Like he didn't seem to be a guy who had the intelligence level to weave a story that good, that exonerated Demeter. So that was kind of striking.
In a follow-up of DiNardo's testimony, the prosecution team asks a mob boss to court.
Johnny Papalia is summoned to the Demeter trial. He is simply asked to stand up in the courtroom and be identified as an associate of Joe DiNardo by damning him through association with a notorious mobster like Johnny Papalia.
To believe DiNardo, that he knew who killed Christine, but it wasn't Demeter, if you believe him, then you've got a reasonable doubt, right? Leo clearly demolished the credibility of Joe DiNardo because Leo was talented and DiNardo was a real wretch.
After a marathon, 11 weeks, the trial comes to a close, with one witness not testifying.
One of the voices that the jury didn't hear live in the courtroom was the voice of Peter Demeter himself. He was never called to the witness stand by prosecution or defense.
I'm not sure what good would have come from it. Peter's language was always so circular. His thoughts were always so convoluted. He would go off on a tangent. So the fact that he didn't testify was probably a good thing.
The jury deliberates.
Jury comes back in around 3 hours quick. And the jury want to listen to the tapes. They have one question and they want to listen to parts of the tapes. You can count on that. They're Peter Demeter's voice.
After what at that time was the longest criminal trial in Canadian history, the jury came back and delivered a verdict of guilty.
The verdict was guilty of hiring persons unknown to murder his wife.
Why isn't he in the witness box, Demeter? He's allowed to testify. Put yourself in the jury's shoes. They hear Demeter time after time, day after day on tape, with things that are incriminating or sure could be incriminating. And when the grand moment comes, other people testify, the defense call witnesses, not him. And I think that that was a powerful factor.
No jury in Canada, and particularly in a relatively small town like London, Ontario, was ever going to acquit him. It was all too confusing. He was obviously a nasty person. He talked and talked, and the things he said sounded to the jury like he was admitting to something. So I assumed they would convict. I did not think they would do it in 4 hours. To do it in 4 hours means they really didn't understand what in hell had gone down.
This was too much action happening way too quickly in the middle of a trial. And jurors' heads must have been just spinning like watching a ping pong match.
In my gut, probably like the jury, I think Peter probably did commission someone to kill Christine. But I am absolutely certain that were I on that jury, I would not have voted to convict him. There was nothing really linking him at any point to the crime, only innuendo and ambiguous statements. I might have thought he did it, but I would not have been able to think that beyond a reasonable shadow of doubt.
Peter was given a life sentence without possibility of parole for 10 years.
Welcome back. For those who still believe Peter Demeter is innocent, they are shocked when he is charged with plotting a murder, not once, but more times. We now continue with the conclusion of the death of Christine Demeter by persons unknown. While millionaire builder Peter Demeter is serving his sentence in Millhaven maximum security, detectives are on the hunt for Christine Demeter's killer.
The Duck, before he could be arrested on suspicion of murdering Christine, the Duck fled Canada and went back to Hungary. Now, he was eventually arrested by Hungarian police, but before he could be interviewed by prosecution, he died very suddenly in prison. It certainly looks suspicious because he never got to say what his part in Christine's murder, if any, there was.
Peter Demeter stays in the headlines by launching an appeal.
And he had a following, people who, I'm not saying they thought he was wrongfully convicted, but who questioned his conviction.
Peter eventually did appeal the verdict, and Eddie Greenspan, his lawyer, was able to present new evidence.
My name's David Watt. I was the Crown in the Court of Appeal responding to Mr. Demeter's appeal. The place was full, which is unusual for an appeal. The number of grounds of appeal were also unusual. We argued the case for a period of 2 weeks. Circumstantial cases have an attraction. They're like putting together a puzzle, but you don't have the picture on the front of the box.
It was revealed that Mr. X had been lying in his testimony.
He testifies that the Duck was seen spending huge amounts of money at the Woodbine racetrack. The only problem with this is the racetrack wasn't open that day, which is a bit of a problem for his story.
And it was also revealed that the Duck had actually been in Hungary at the time of Christine's murder, discounting him as Peter's hitman.
A major point of appeal, Laszlo Epper's alleged confession of the murder. Did the judge err in excluding it? Could it have proven Peter's innocence?
The verdict was upheld and Peter was given a life sentence without possibility of parole for 10 years.
Greenspan argues the appeal at the Supreme Court. where it's dismissed unanimously. Demeter then launches a civil suit against 3 insurance companies.
Even though he'd been convicted of his wife's murder, he was petitioning for her life insurance policies to be awarded to Andrea, and with interest at the time, that equaled $4 million. Just like the criminal trial, he lost the civil trial as well.
After his prison term, Peter is granted parole.
He's released from prison and is able to go out and about. Eventually, he's moved to a halfway house in Peterborough.
As Peter steps forward in his new life, a piece of his old one goes up in flames. The house on Dundas Crescent.
The home suffered a fire, which didn't destroy it. And days later, there was a second fire. All very suspicious. An investigation was started as to an arson by Peel Regional Police.
Crown Attorney Lorne McConnery works with police on a wiretap order.
The wiretaps on Demeter's phone led to the determination that Mike Preston was involved.
Anthony Michael Preston is a former inmate of Warkworth Prison. In the town of Peterborough, 90 minutes northeast of Toronto, another parolee waves an officer down.
Mike Lane, who had known Demeter while in prison, came to the Peterborough police and said he'd been approached with this plot by Demeter.
Over drinks, Peter propositions Mike Lane, asking him to help him kill the would-be victim Stuart Demeter, who was the 19-year-old son of Stephen Demeter, Peter's cousin.
It wasn't that long after the murder he was out on parole, and of course the first thing he was trying to do was murder people, you know.
Police begin a project called Operation Dragon. And Mike Lane, a bodybuilder on parole, becomes an informant.
Preston was called by Lane to meet him at a Holiday Inn, which was set up for video. And when he came in, he was very leery of Mr. Lane, and eventually Lane said, well, he'd been talking to Demeter, who wanted him to do something. At that point, Preston sort of said, oh, I know what you're talking about. He wants you to kidnap his nephew. I've already burned his house down, and then he refused to pay me. So I won't do anything for him.
Police were able to trace the arson to Preston and his connection to Peter.
Intelligence teams then work to get Peter on tape.
In Michael Lane's flat, he had called Demeter to meet him, to work out all the details. Demeter shows up, he comes in, it's just all we really see is a kitchen area. Demeter sits at the little table, and they talk about the plan to abduct Stuart, how they would dispose of his body, how he would be killed. His intention was to murder Stuart, and it was to get back at Dr. Demeter. He accused Demeter of depleting his estate. He accused him of turning his daughter against him. And so he was going to get back at Dr. Demeter by harming one of his children.
In the spring of 1985, Peter is brought to trial in a case that is all too familiar.
25 witnesses are expected to be called by the Crown, and the trial should last almost a month. So far, evidence points to a calculated plan of revenge through kidnapping and murder.
In the courtroom, there is a new woman, Peter's girlfriend, Lisa Ross.
While Peter is living in his Peterborough halfway house, he spots Lisa, who at the time is a university student. She's a single mother, and she basically abandons school to become Peter Demeter's secretary. It only takes a week for Lisa Ross to be completely hooked by Peter. He basically ruins her life.
Lorne McConnery is leading the prosecution, while Peter Demeter starts the trial conducting his own defense.
Mr. Demeter continues his own defense in a rambling, sometimes inaudible style, but does nothing to strengthen his case.
He could reach out and touch me. We were that close. He was always writing notes. Sometimes during when he was defending himself, he'd give me notes.
The jury is played the video from Operation Dragon.
He wanted to get his cousin, Dr. Stephen Demeter, murdered. He wanted his child to be murdered. He wanted some insurance man to be murdered. And there was no ambiguity about his wish for this. It was all on tape. No ifs, ands, and buts.
Peter takes to the stand to let the court know the tapes are not what you think.
Demeter said in his testimony that Lane was practicing for a movie and he would practice his lines with him. We eventually called someone from the movie company. Michael Lane did not have a speaking role. He had a short cameo role as a blacksmith.
Detective Donna Murray testifies about a ransom note found in Mike Preston's apartment.
I know that it was examined, it had Demeter's fingerprints on it. And they found the typewriter that Demeter had used to type it. Were able to identify it as a result of a faulty key.
Anthony Michael Preston's confession of arson led to his conviction for the fires. But Demeter's arson charges are stayed.
Peter's intentions were to kill Stuart Demeter, to have either Mike Lane subsequently and originally Preston abduct and kill Stuart Demeter.
As the jury goes out to deliberate, Peter hands McConnery a note.
It said something like, "Mr. McConnery, you and I know what's going to happen here and that I'll be found guilty. I want to tell you that I am prepared to be a passionate Crown witness against the killer of Christine Demeter, and in return for which the Crown would go to the parole board, get me parole, and I would be deported back to Hungary." It was a bit of a wow moment. It was the closest we ever had to him acknowledging an involvement in the killing of Christine.
The jury deliberated for 6.5 hours before bringing back its guilty verdict shortly after 11 o'clock last night.
Between the wiretaps and the testimony of Stephen Demeter, Peter is convicted a second time.
He got 2 concurrent life sentences, one for the counseling of Lane, one for the counseling of Preston.
Before the ink is even dry on that conviction, he is arrested yet again for conspiring to kidnap and murder a member of the family of one of his perceived enemies.
Peter plots another attack.
And it is now alleged that a male party conspired with a female party to enlist the aid of the police operative to abduct and, if necessary, murder the 16-year-old daughter of this attorney.
Peter Winstanley is a South African immigrant who the plan is to kidnap Toby Bellman's daughter. Winstanley goes straight to the police and he wears a wire to record conversations between Lisa Ross and Peter as they plot to kidnap Bellman's daughter. And so police are in on the plot.
Lisa Ross agrees to testify against Peter Demeter, and her charges are dropped. Peter Demeter is found guilty of conspiring to kidnap and murder and is given another life sentence.
I believe Justice O'Driscoll said about Peter that he's pure evil. He's just lucky that he didn't kill anybody else, because he was certainly trying to, and if you let him out tomorrow, he'd think of somebody to murder.
Young model and mother Christine Demeter was killed in a plot arranged by her husband. Her brutal murder committed still by persons unknown.
Just tragic, just horrible that a woman was slain for no reason, that her daughter has been marked with this all of her life, has gone through all kinds of difficulties as a result of Peter's continuing manipulation.
When we won the Edgar Allan Poe Mystery Writers of America Award for this book, I was absolutely stunned, but I felt sad that Christine's life was the way I won this book. And looking back on it now, 47 years after I wrote the book, my feelings haven't changed. What a tragic mess of lives this was. And I still feel that today.
Peter Demeter just turned 91 behind bars at the Bath Institute. All his attempts for parole have been denied. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat.
Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.